Welcome to part 2 of the Generations episode from Straight from the CPA's Mouth. In part 1, we talked about the different generations, their financial histories and behaviors, and what has informed their financial foundations. Today, we are continuing that conversation. I am your host, Danielle Adam, Communications Coordinator with the CPA Education Foundation, and our guests are Kari Speaker Smith, partner at Fletcher Moodrick LLP in Grand Prairie, and Ryan Gubic, founder and president of MRG Wealth Management in Calgary. Keep listening to hear straight from the CPA's mouths.
I heard that future-casting is an essential tool for long-term business.
According to a recent poll, 48% of Canadians say they are $200 or less each month away from financial
It was down again. Do you think the energy sector...
60% of Albertans say the economy is too dependent on oil.
Canadian student leaves university with $26,000. I'm considering cloud computing for my business.
Filter out the noise. Hear it straight from the CPA's mouth.
Ryan, maybe you can enlighten us a little, and Kari. There are lots of articles online that talk about the financial and economic circumstances of millennials. Higher education costs, higher housing costs, incomes don't go as far as they used to. Is that a reality, or how accurate is that?
Well, I think from a factual perspective, when you look at inflation costs in housing, for example, we look at the inflation for the average income versus inflation on housing in Canada. We can just look at the numbers and, from a quality of life perspective, housing's more expensive now, right? So there are aspects where inflation on materials or goods that we use and consume in our life have outpaced our income levels. That being said, the fundamentals around living and budgeting, like balancing your budget, haven't changed, right? I think one of the bigger pieces that's changed around that is the access to information and the amount of wants that we have now. So with information, we're able to shop and look at buying more things than before. So if we look at 40 years ago, for example, I'm a car guy and I love toys. For a sports car perspective, kids and individuals probably might have been able to talk in the neighborhood and know what the names of fancy, expensive sports cars are. But unless their parents or their parents' friends had one, they're probably not touching it, seeing it, feeling it, hearing it. Now you can take your phone, iPad, computer, and basically anything in the world. If you want, $1 million sports car, you can go on a site, see a video of someone driving it, touching it. You can fly to Vegas and spend, a couple $100 to go rent it for an hour. You can, more and more people are using debt to purchase their wants. So you're seeing more material things in society, and that's driving a lot more wants as well. So I think that's different over the generations, where stereotypically in the past, it was, to provide for your family and your kids, have a home, maybe a couple camping trips, and save for, the future. That's changed now to, having quite often, a really nice condo or, a house that, has, the kitchen you want and stainless steel appliances or the granite or things that don't necessarily add a ton more value to your life, but they're material things that cost money to eat away your budget. And then instead of, maybe one car and taking public transit, or no car and just taking public transit, quite often there's 2 leases involved. Quite often from trips, instead of spending, $100 and going camping with the family for the weekend, it's flying to another country or another area and incurring hotel costs and meal costs. And don't get me wrong, all these things are fun and exciting. And if they're part of someone's value system, it's good to budget for them. But I think one of the things that we're happening in society right now is we don't teach the generations about personal finance. Most individuals don't learn how to budget or basic accounting in school or university. So unless they kind of go through the school of hard knocks and go through it and realize, 20% credit card debt is really hard to pay off. So let's make sure we don't have that, or focus on paying it down, or having someone that we trust that teaches these things. It's quite a difficult lesson to learn. It's easier to spend than it is to save. right? So I think some of those behavioral changes have really evolved over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I emulate what Ryan is saying. There is no question that we don't have enough of that basis of that initial training on the budgeting. You know, we had some conversation with some high school students and just talking about, you know, this having a net paycheck. Okay, now you've got to figure out this is the things that you're going to spend on in a month. How far did that net paycheck go? And that mindset was not there at all. Just because I have the dollar, I can spend the dollar, but not only you don't necessarily have the dollar, but you've got lots of opportunities to get credit to apply. And so, you know, I think a big thing in our economy right now, we have one of the highest debt loads on average for individuals than ever. Mm-hmm. And so there's so many out there that haven't necessarily learned on how to manage that and the whole idea of finances. And that's at every generation. Right. But the accessibility is second to none. Like the amount of shopping when the pandemic happened and people were situated at home for those first couple of weeks, online shopping burst at the seams. And so the idea of, okay, what do I really need versus what do I want? And long term, how is this going to impact me if I purchase these things now? A lot of that education is still not necessarily at the forefront, just because accessibility is so easy. But I do see a lot in the younger generation saying, I don't know if I need all the stuff that the people before me had. You know, if I look at Gen Xers and baby boomers acquiring their homes and their vehicles and maybe other properties, then I see a lot of those that are just coming into the profession saying, I don't know how much of this I actually need. And do I need to spend all my time mowing the lawn versus spending time socializing with friends and doing some other things versus all the upkeep that might come with some of these things that are acquired or keeping life simpler. I've heard that many times. I can still enjoy life and do a lot of the things that the profession will bring to me, but I also want to keep life simple. And I think, again, with this type of flip over we've had in our work and family life right now, people are saying simpler is way easier. And I can accomplish just as much, if not more. So, which I think is going to affect how people financially are going to manage themselves over the next few years dramatically.
Yeah.
I agree, Kari. I've noticed a shift starting to happen, and not necessarily just by generation. It kind of goes across millennials, Gen X, and even into some baby boomers. But that shift of, you know, the debt load and the cost, is it really worth the benefit of the material items? And you're seeing even at TV, like more shows like Tiny Homes and things like that coming up that, you know, people are looking at their job, their life, and saying, okay, is there a different way? Is there a better way for me and my family? And, you know, that's going to shape the new generations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So then would you guys agree or disagree? In the first half of the 20th century, there are these world wars, there's more scarcity. And so people learn to make more with less. And then as time goes on, things become more accessible. And as things become more accessible, people kind of go haywire because their habits are take when they're able to take. And now we're seeing, like you guys have been saying, that, well, I don't need all this stuff. Things are so accessible now that I can let this thing pass by because I know that something else will be available later on. Would you agree or disagree that that's kind of been the motion throughout the last 60 years, 70 years?
I just think this shift has been so recent. I really think what's built up over the last 20 years, excluding maybe the last 2 or 3, has been, there's a lot more available, but there was still a sense of, but if I've worked hard and I really want that, then I'm going to go for it and not sit and wait. You know, I think because we may have seen the generations before us, we thought, they've worked all their life and then they're finally going to retire and then something changes from a health perspective. And so that mind shift of, okay, no things, but the last certainly our economy already had a dramatic shift in the last 2 years in Western Canada and certainly in the province of Alberta. This pandemic is just another layer on top of that. Mm-hmm. And so now it's more, what do I really need? And shifting it back and saying, yeah, where do I really want to be in 5 or 10 or 15 years? I think long-term perspective is what's become the shift versus a shorter term perspective that might have been there before.
That makes sense for sure.
If I could just add on to that just for a second. I think in life, with people and society, there's always a search for balance. And, that ties into economics, but it also goes further than that in terms of, mental health and physical health. And many of us are searching for that balance, but it's very difficult to find that true balance. So what ends up happening is, if you think of a pendulum, quite often I feel we swing to one end and then realize, okay, maybe that's too far. And then we try and find balance, and then we end up swinging too far to the other end, and it kind of equalization brings us back to the center, and we end up swinging back and forth. And over time, hopefully the goal is that those pendulum swings get less and less wide or broad, and we get closer to that balance. But when you see that in economics and what we've been talking about here, you have stereotypically areas where you've saved too much, maybe worked a little harder, and then areas where you're working less and saving less, and the impact of that. You can look at areas in physical health. Like I know myself, around Christmas, I try and before Christmas work out a little bit more, eat healthy, and probably overdo it on the healthy side. Christmas comes, and then I eat tons of everything in sight and drink a little bit too much. And then I realize, I've overdone it. And then January hits, and I got a New Year's resolution, and I hit back to the gym in my health. And even in that area, you got this pendulum swing, right? So I think, that comes true in a lot of areas of our life.
Absolutely. There's always that search for balance. So then how would you describe, obviously, again, in general terms, each generation's financial situations as they stand today? Kari, maybe you would want to start us off. I mean, baby boomers, they're shifting into retirement now.
They're shifting into retirement, but there are in some cases, they're assisting the next generation. I think a lot of that has happened just, because of the work hard, play hard attitude. And there's just a lot of diversities in families in that next generation. So I'm finding from a professional standpoint, I'm working with a lot of the baby boomer generation in the question of saying, one, either I've built this wealth and I want to manage it well so that it can get passed on not only to the next generation, but the third generation. It needs to be there because their education is going to be a lot more expensive is the general theme. We'll see what happens after this pandemic. I have some personal views on that maybe changing considerably. But the cost of a car, the cost of a home, things to get them situated and settled in, they may not have the ability to do that as quickly as what those in the boomers and the Gen X generation were able to do. And so boomers, I find, are more the ones worrying. The Xers are saying, I'm just going to keep working. And a lot have morphed into doing something different. But there's also a wealth of education in that group that can still be transpired onto the next generation. So it's good to see them still putting back into the professions and the industries and education because there's so much great wealth of information and experience that the next generations can grow from. So right now, that's kind of where I'm seeing those two generations. And maybe Ryan, you want to speak on the others. The only thing I would add on the Gen Zers, because I have my own children in that, it's really interesting to see their perspective. I'm finding they are driven. They are still very excited about what the future has to offer. Their entrepreneurial spirit is something exciting, and I'm not sure what brought that, but I think it's because they're almost having to go back and figure out how can I make something out of nothing. And I think they're the ones that are really going to excite us and push the rest of us to keep moving.
Super neat. Ryan, can you maybe enlighten us a bit more about the millennials in their situations currently?
Sure. And maybe before I do that, just jump a little bit into the baby boomers and Gen Xers as well. I think the other thing that I'm seeing a bit of a shift is the retirement mentality. So we know, what does retirement mean to somebody? And, it doesn't always mean the stop work at 55 to 65 and then golf or walk every day. I've seen more and more individuals that are looking at, for a variety of reasons, like Kari mentions, a lot of it is intergenerational wealth transfer or setting up their future generations for success. Other is kind of purpose and value in life. And although they don't want to work 50-hour work weeks, they still want to contribute to society. They still want to be busy. A lot of them love what they do, or if they don't, they want to explore their next career, sometimes even in their 60s, where people are going back to school to learn new skills. They're still very active, able-minded, and they want to contribute and add value. So I think that retirement mentality piece is changing, and the longer an individual works and the less they draw down from their investments, that changes the financial picture as well, because you need less money, or your money goes a lot further because your drawdown period is smaller. From a millennial standpoint and Gen Z, I echo and agree with Kari. I'm really excited to see what the younger generations are going to do. I think with some adversity and, looking at a global pandemic right now, it's definitely not the best job market we've ever experienced in the last century. So there are some difficulties for these generations to get jobs, grow their careers. And with adversity, I think, comes creativity. And Kari touched base on it. And I'm really excited to see the problem solving and the creative options and the entrepreneurship that comes out from that, and saying, okay, here's some of the constraints we have. I'm a big believer in focusing on the areas you can control and put the areas you can't control to your side. Focusing on the uncontrollable usually doesn't net a whole lot of positive results, but if you put your time and energy into the areas that you can control, that's where you can really leapfrog and see some really positive actions and change. So, that's where I see those generations. I think for a large amount of them right now, it's more on survival. So it's, finishing university, or if they're done university, getting a job, or figuring out, how do they hone their skill, and also a bit of soul searching, figuring out, why am I doing what I'm doing? And is this what I want to do for the next 5, 10, 20 years? Or if not, what does that look like? So I think that's a big piece as well. And that plays into the finances, because if an individual is looking at going back to school or changing their financial income streams, that of course changes how much you can save and grow from an asset base. So there's a bit of flux going on in those two generations right now. Generation Z, being the younger generation, a lot of it's still in the learning, and I think there's a lot of positivism in that, and figuring out ways to make the world a better place, their country, their families, themselves, and looking to create opportunities, not looking for just something handed to them.
Fantastic. So what would you each say is the biggest difference between each generation and the biggest overall similarity between each generation?
Biggest difference, if I can jump in, those are good questions. And, if I thought about it for 15 minutes, I might even give 2 different answers. But the one off the top of my head, I think would be resilience and ability to adapt to change. I think the younger generations, and specifically Generation Z right now, and probably even into the millennials, they're dealing with change constantly. And changes happen throughout history, throughout life, but the level and the pace of change that's going on right now, in my opinion, it's an exponential level of change. So resiliency, adaptability from now versus kind of in the 1950s, using the labor force as one example, stereotypically back then, you would, learn a skill, go work for an employer, and quite often that employer would be the same employer when you start to when you retire. Yeah. Right. So there's, some level of change within learning new job types of that employer and so forth, but it's not the same level of change that you're going to have right now where, an individual that graduates university, let's say at 22, what does the next 40 years look like for them? And the amount of change and resiliency that person needs to have to be successful, in my opinion, that's a major change from the ends of those generations.
Absolutely. And I would say the similarities in those generations is the values. At the end of the day, the core values, whatever it is that really drives, and again, I go back to families. If you're talking in a room of 3 generations, the core values that generally is amongst that family are fundamentally the same. And the value of having purpose and having whether it's harmony or just family is the focus. Whatever it is that their core values are, that seems to be the similarities between the generations. And I think people are more introspective during a time like this, that they're starting to discover and can bring forward those values a lot easier than maybe they could have when they were really busy in their day-to-day life doing it differently before. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I would say the similarities come back to the values. I think each of them have similar values in where they want the end result to go. The difference might be just the method that they use to get there. And in finances, and Ryan probably sees it much more than I do, their process and how they make a financial decision is different. But why they wanted to get the end result that they do, whatever those base values are, likely are the same, or very similar amongst the generations, at least amongst a similar family.
Mm-hmm. I think that ties into some advice that all generations can really use to add value to their life. And that's really clarifying and getting crisp on what your values are. Because I agree with Kari. I think values are, fundamental to just humans and nature and across the different generations. And I also agree with you that we quite often don't spend enough time thinking about what our true values are. So for example, if your values are family, it's like, what about family is really your value? And what does that look like? What does it feel like? What does it taste like? What do you want that to be? Because when you're looking at financial planning or an economic perspective, or even just from a goal setting perspective, if we don't have really clear, crisp, articulated goals, how are we going to achieve them? Right? So for some people on retirement, if your goal is, I want to retire when I am 60, okay, you might retire when you're 60, but is, eating canned tuna every day your idea of retirement? Or is it, still working part-time, spending time with your grandchildren, snowboarding down to a specific country, involved in the community, volunteering? Like, really get robust and clarify what that specific goal is. And that helps increase your chances of success.
Yeah. And undoubtedly, it would help communication between people who are approaching the same situation with different ways, and they perceive that they're completely different and valuing completely different things. But if you break it down and acknowledge that, no, the values are the same, just the ways of approaching it are different, then that might make things a little more understanding between people.
For sure. We can have a conversation with 3 generations in discussing their corporation and deciding, okay, what way do we want something to go? Do we want to add a new business line, or are we selling off a portion? Are we bringing in investors, or are we, all of those options? And when you talk to each of those generations and bring them all together in the room, at the end of the day, it's like Ryan mentioned, what is the end goal for everyone? And it doesn't mean it has to be this answer or that answer. There could be something in between that's going to accomplish that goal for all the generations. And so decision making, when they all have a vision of what that end goal is, it just makes the decision making so much easier with multiple generations sitting in the same room.
Mm-hmm. So then I guess my last question for you guys would be, if you were to sit with a stereotypical baby boomer, a stereotypical Gen Xer, millennial, Gen Zer, what would your advice be for them in the current context?
I would turn the question around a little bit. Mm-hmm. I think it's very individual on the people you're talking to, and I understand where you're coming from. I guess I would more ask a question to let them tell me what they think. But, from the baby boomers, what do you see as your legacy? What do you want to leave for future generations, or for the community, or for yourself? What is satisfying for yours? And for those Gen Xers, where do you see yourself in 5, 10, 15 years? Where do you want to get to? The millennials are right in the thick of things. What are the things that keep you up at night? What are your top concerns and worries to direct on what needs to be rectified? And for the new ones, what are your dreams and aspirations? What are the big, what do they call them? Big, fat, hairy goals. Just, thinking big picture and then winding it down to say, okay, well, here's the big picture. What are some little things we can do to start inching you towards that goal? So it's just because perspective is longer term for the younger than maybe the older. Mm-hmm. But I think the path is the same.
And you know what? I think that's an excellent point. Asking those questions. Those questions are really questions that everybody at every point can ask themselves. Sure, baby boomers, they might be shifting more into the retirement thing, but they can still be asking themselves what are their dreams and aspirations, and all of that. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Kari. So let's take the same approach with you, Ryan. What question would you ask each generation to consider?
Wonderful. I'm glad you switched it to question, because I was going to say similar to what Kari said. I think giving advice before understanding the situation is kind of like a doctor giving out a prescription without understanding what's wrong. Yeah. And the first question I always ask everybody that I meet that's looking for advice or support is, what are your challenges and what do you want? And I think that's a bit agnostic across the different generations, because you could have someone that's 25 that is really focused on retirement planning at 25, and it's really important that they retire by age of 40 because they want to give back to the world or go travel or whatever their goals are. You can't ever, I think, assume anything depending on age. And then there's individuals on the other end of the spectrum that are in their 60s, and you're thinking, oh, you might be really concerned about retirement or these aspects just given your age. And they're the complete opposite. They're like, no, I got another 20 years of really good work left in me. I'm really focused on growing my business and I want to acquire this. And, so I think it's really age agnostic and it's more value driven. So it's helping the individual. And I think the advice for all these, and we were talking about it just 2 minutes ago, is really getting crisp on your values. So, and writing them down. Having a conversation, if you're by yourself, have a conversation with yourself and write it down. If you have a partner, have a conversation with your partner and share with them your values and your views, and ask them to share theirs. Quite often, we can be with somebody for a year, 5 years, 10 years, or 30 years and not even fully understand their financial values and the decisions that they make and why. And it really helps bring enlightenment, I think, to the relationship. It helps with goal planning. Once you understand that value framework and the challenges they're having, then you can work with that individual and map out a strategy and a solution to resolve.
Agreed.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, you guys, for joining us today. I think it's been a very interesting conversation. I don't know about you guys, but I found that the more we talk about the generations as individual groups, the more we realize that they are the same and that people are people are people. So thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything you would like to add before we close up?
Just a thank you for letting me speak today, and I encourage any CPAs that are out there to really be sharing your experiences with whichever generation it is you're talking to, because I think we all have a lot to offer each other, and I think that's a great way that we're going to build up community and build up our economic outlook for the future too. So thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Danielle, for this opportunity. And thank you, Kari, for sharing your experiences and your insights in this as well. And echo what you said. I think each of us have experiences and expertise in our own fields. And the more that we can share this knowledge, kind of a theory of abundance rather than scarcity, the more that information and knowledge can empower individuals to make decisions that improve the lives of them and their families.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, you guys. There you are, everyone, straight from the CPA's mouths. We hope that you enjoyed our conversation and that you maybe learned a thing or two. Keep tuning in to Straight from the CPA's Mouth for more information and conversation, and make sure to subscribe to our emailing list if you haven't already.
Straight from the CPA's Mouth is brought to you by the CPA Education Foundation. The CPA Education Foundation is the charitable arm of the Alberta CPA profession, providing up to $1.2 million each year in support of business and accounting education in the province. This podcast is just one of many resource materials available through the HESHI CPA Knowledge Centre. This virtual hub features Alberta CPAs sharing their unique perspective and vast expertise on topics and issues such as leadership, finance, entrepreneurship, and more. Visit cpaalberta.ca/foundation for more information on the HESHI CPA Knowledge Centre and to learn how Alberta CPAs inspire success.